DND number 6, The Worth of Souls in Jesus' Name, Chapter 13. Agent Stevens tossed a report on the desk in front of his partner, Kurt Wells. Kurt Wells, has a brother. Agent Dodge quickly read through the document in front of him. Donald Harris? Stevens nodded. Governor Donald Harris, the Honorable Governor of South Dakota. His older brother, Kurt Anton Harris, left home at the age of 17. He hasn't heard from him in over 20 years. Kurt took on his mother's maiden name of Wells. Apparently, the Harris household was strict and unyielding, and the father pushing both boys to achieve ultimate success. Kurt never wanted to follow the rules and bailed as soon as he could. He was arrested in New York at the age of 18 for grand theft auto. He paroled at 22. After that, he disappeared. I'm guessing that's when Daly picked him up. He needed a malleable soul to do his dirty work for him, Agent Dodge surmised. And he's been with Daly all these years. He spent his life trying to protect his brother. Dodge shook his head. Starts with a little rebellion against an iron hand and ends with messing up your whole life. So anyway, do you think the governor is dirty? I already spoke with him. From what we can tell, he's a straight shooter. He hasn't had contact with his brother since the day he graduated from college. Dodge leaned on his hands as he thought. The senator found a soft spot in Wells, ex-con, proud of his little brother, what he's made of himself. Brother Donnie will remain on top as long as Wells keeps in line. He does what he's expected to do for Daly. I think you got it. So, guess who did time with Wells? Fill me in. A young buck, in for statutory rape. 18 years old. Name is Alan Bradshaw. Mother, dead from a drug overdose. Father, unknown. Butch? Yes. And again, a famous little brother, Matthew Wilson. Matthew Wilson, running back for Dallas? One and the same. You've probably heard his story. He was put in foster care as a young kid. He fell in with a decent family. Big kid, gets to high school, excels, Victorian, captain of the football team, picks up a scholarship to the University of Texas, breaks all kinds of records, fourth round draft pick, now making millions for Dallas. And again, he's clean as a whistle. So Butch did what he was told in order to protect his little brother, just like Dora Suarez has been doing for 20 years in order to protect her family. Well, she's ready to talk now that they've been placed in protective custody, Dodge said. She's being brought in as we speak. She insists that Jeff Davis be present. She trusts him. Stevens nodded. I got no problem with that. Jeff is a good man. You know he's involved with Mackenzie Daly. I would be too if she'd have me, Stevens said with a lusty sigh. Dodge chuckled. You know, this entire case is strange. It involves so many prominent figures. Talman Daly, the senator, Mackenzie Daly, the writer, Matthew Wilson, the pro baller, Governor Harris. And don't forget the Kenos. The entire family is famous. No, couldn't forget them. And even Jeff Davis is famous. To think, he's that agent who went missing back several years ago in Savannah. If I recall the story correctly, he was abducted and tortured. More importantly, they were able to rescue those kids. That was also when the Bureau tried to fry one of our own for doing our freaking job. Agent Dodge nodded. Keegan Tanner. Good man. He saved Jeff Davis. He saved those kids, and he returned hundreds of kidnapped kids to their parents. Dodge shook his head. Did you know Tanner? Stevens asked. We worked a case together once when we were both in Virginia. He was a newbie just out of Quantico. Tough. Sharp. Reminded me of me. Yeah, right, Stevens laughed. I hear he works for Ameritech now. He does, and Jeff Davis is one of his closest friends, which is one of the reasons I have no problem with Davis being in on anything. So, did the two of you pick up the Wallace kid this morning? We did. Dodge eyed his friend. And? Did you find anything? Well, I've been waiting for you to ask. Heck yeah, we did. A laptop. A few miles south of where Wells pulled off the road and took the girl into the woods. It's at the lab as we speak. We're about to nail this son of a gun. One of my favorite pastimes. Let's go interview the housekeeper. New scene. Jeff handed Dora Suarez a tissue and waited while she blotted her eyes. Dora looked down at the tissue, folded it once, twice, drew a deep breath. It was my day off, but I came in to make sure the house was just right. There was this big political dinner being given the next day. She shook her head. My own children were only babies then. Do you remember their exact ages? Agent Dodge pressed. It will help to document every single fact. I remember, Doris said bravely. I remember everything. I wrote it all down. It's in the journal. Dodge nodded. Before they'd even begun, she'd walked in and handed him a journal. For an agent, it was like manna from heaven. She had already given them enough information for an indictment. And the day you came in on your day off was after the first time he raped you? Well after. I came in because I was afraid of displeasing Senator Daley, which wasn't a hard thing to do. We constantly walked on eggshells around him. I was afraid he would follow through with his threats to deport me and take my children away from me, and so I came in to make sure everything was ready. She gave a humorless laugh. Ironically, coming in was my big mistake. Why is that? Jeff asked. I came in the kitchen entrance like always. I found some laundry in the dryer and decided to fold it. I went to Mackenzie's room to put it away and walked in on the senator having his way with a young girl. How young? I don't know for sure, but young, maybe about 13 or 14. The girl appeared to be asleep or drugged. I remember just standing there, not even sure what I was actually seeing, what I was seeing. Then I regained my senses and ran out. She stopped and looked out the window as if she was seeing what had taken place. But the senator, he was always quick on his feet. He caught up to me before I could get out of the house, and he slapped me around and shook me and threatened me. I told him things had gone far enough, that there was no way I could ignore what I'd seen. And he warned me to think again, but I refused. How could I let him get away with what he'd done to that girl, that young girl? Do you know her name? Dora shook her head. Sorry. I never did find out who she was. Poor child. I always wondered about her. It's okay, Agent Stevens said with a sigh, trying to help her stay on track. What happened next? Did you try to blow the whistle on Daly? She shook her head again, her eyes staring straight ahead. She spoke slowly. I went home to wait for my husband to get back from his job at the transportation department so that I could tell him about Senator Daly. I was going to tell him everything, about the times the senator raped me, about the girl in Mackenzie's room, and all the other things. She stopped and shook her head. My husband never made it home. He lost his brakes. He went off the road. He hit a roadside boulder and flew through the windshield. Jeff cursed. At the wake, in the guise of offering condolences, Senator Daly came up to me and took my hand and told me he was sorry he'd had to demonstrate his power, and he let me know he would always be there for me, and more importantly, for my kids. Always. I understood his meaning. From that day forward, my life became a nightmare. The senator had an appetite for young girls. I think it had to do with Mickey. How so? Agent Dodge asked. It was like he became aroused beyond his ability to contain it whenever he'd had to discipline Mackenzie. And when Mickey turned 18 and finally left the house, the senator seemed to settle down. Jeff reached out and took her hand. Did Daly ever rape Mackenzie or Marissa? She shook her head. I don't think so. If he did, I wasn't aware of it. He did have other girls, though. Girls off the street. Sometimes willing, sometimes drugged. Kurt joined him, too. Disgusting. Disgusting, filthy pigs. How many times would you say he raped you? Agent Dodge asked. She closed her eyes and blew out a breath. I lost count. For a while it was weekly, then it dwindled. The worst times would be when he'd have one of his sessions with Mickey. Such a sweet little girl, but she could never please him, and she pushed him. Even at 7 years old, she knew how to push his buttons. It was eerie the way he'd calmly lock his fingers around her wrist and pull her upstairs to punish her. He'd come out of her room with a wild-eyed look on his face, and I knew it would either be me or some young girl he'd have Kurt find. I started offering myself to him, hoping he would take the bait and not go after some poor young thing. And it usually worked. Agent Dodge sighed heavily. Agent Stevens paced. Jeff cursed softly. The evil in this world seemed to infiltrate every part of life, in order to keep young girls from the senator's clutches. She was more than a victim. She was a hero. And where was Mrs. Daly when all this was happening? Jeff asked. Poor bird, Dora said, shaking her head. He kept her so doped up on meds, she never knew what was going on around her. But she had to know her daughter was being abused at the hands of her husband, Jeff said. Maybe, but he had her where she couldn't think. She couldn't make a rational decision. She still can't, and I'm sure she didn't realize all the things that monster did to her daughter. Jeff swallowed and sat up straight. Things like what? Are you talking about the beatings? The beatings, yes, but so much more. The terror, the dread, the humiliation. The worst one was when Mickey was 13. I'll never forget it. What happened? Jeff asked, dreading the answer. She was headed out to a birthday party for one of her friends. He told her no way could she go in a shirt so low cut, and she smarted off, as she had a tendency to do. Dora shrugged. It was the only way she could assert herself. It was the only way she could rebel against his iron hand. Anyway, when she smarted off, he took her by the hand and led her up the stairs. I think she instinctively knew this time wasn't going to be a normal beating. She tried to get away, tried to jerk her hand free, but he just smacked her several times before he ever got her to her room. Dora's tears started anew, and Jeff's expression remained stony. There was a lot of screaming and yelling and hitting, and then there was silence. I was worried. I waited in the upstairs hall for him to come out, and when he didn't, I thought maybe he'd hurt her or even killed her. I was terrified, but finally I opened the door. Mr. Daly, he was just standing there in the middle of the room, staring into the corner, and I looked over, and little Mickey was standing there in the corner, standing tall, completely naked. Cursing softly, Jeff stood and paced the room, coming to stand by a small window. He stared out while she continued. Her nose was bleeding and her hair was all tangled. Her entire body shook, but she stood there, unmoving, her eyes glaring at Mr. Daly. She was so young but so old at the same time. The senator glanced at me and seemed to snap out of the trance he was in. He looked back to Mickey and said, "You like to show off your body so much you will stand there, young lady, until showing off gets old." Dora sighed. She never could keep her mouth shut. "What did she say?" Stevens asked kindly. Dora swallowed. She started screaming at him. Things like, "F you, Daddy," she said. "The only reason I'm standing here without any clothes is because you wanted to see me naked. The only reason you didn't want me to wear that shirt is you're jealous. I know what you really want to do, you sick old man." Stuff like that. He charged at her, then stopped when he was only inches from her, and she stood her ground. She always did. Even when he towered over her like that, she held her chin up. Jeff closed his eyes as he imagined the proud girl standing there, naked, defying death. He just stood there looking her up and down. I thought he was going to jerk her to the floor and rape her. Instead, he hauled off and slapped her so hard that she hit the wall. Then he turned to me and forced me down on Mickey's bed and raped me. Jeff made the decision right then and there that if they weren't able to put the senator away, he would kill the man. No idle threat. Daly was a dead man. Dora wiped her eyes and continued. That poor baby stood in that corner for 3 days. 3 days. Where was her mother during that time? Agent Stevens asked. Marion was 9 months pregnant with Marissa. She had no idea what was going on, and I couldn't tell her because I was afraid she might confront him and he might hurt her and the baby. What happened after 3 days? Jeff asked. I went in the room to take her water and found her collapsed on the floor. I went to tell Mr. Daly. He picked her up from the floor and carried her to her bed. I watched every move he made. I was so worried he would, lose control. She was unconscious. He tried to keep his distance from Mackenzie. The beating stopped? He asked. Well, maybe not stop completely. They did slow down. Instead of a weekly thing, it became every few months. The moment that child turned 18, she left home. She very seldom came back unless there were a lot of people around. She acted like she'd completely forgotten what he'd done to her. Did she ever confide in you? Dodge asked. Never. She knew I knew what he'd done to her, and I knew that she knew what he'd done to me. But we never spoke about it. Dora shook her head as the tears coursed down her cheeks. I don't know. It was like if we didn't talk, then it really didn't happen. Jeff approached and knelt down by her side. You will testify against him? She bit her lip. I give you my word. I'll keep your kids safe. My word. She nodded slowly. I trust you. He stood and nodded. Thank you. Mrs. Suarez, did Daly ever abuse Marissa in any way? Dodge asked. I was so scared that he would. And when Mickey left home, Marissa was only 5. I thought maybe he would transfer his attention to her, but he seemed to be real loving towards her. He never yelled at her. She sat on his lap a lot, and I was suspicious of that. I watched his hands, though. I watched him whenever he was with Marissa, and he didn't seem to have any interest in her. Miss Suarez, I'm sorry for the loss of your husband. We will nail this guy, but you'll have to be strong a little while longer. I'll do it. Mickey was strong. It's my turn. She turned to Jeff as he moved toward the door. Agent Davis, Dora called softly. Do you think she'll forgive me? He smiled kindly at her. There's nothing to forgive. He played you. You're as much a victim as everyone else. To me, you're a hero. You did what you could to protect the innocent. Then again, I can't speak for Mickey. I suggest you speak to her yourself. Maybe it's time to get things out in the open. She nodded. I think you're right. New scene. Talman screamed curses as he slammed down the phone. Marion appeared in the doorway of his study. Talman, can I get you something? He glared up at her. Where's Dora? She didn't come in today. She said she had a family emergency. I don't pay her to take time off. Well, she's never asked for a day off in all these years, Talman. Is there something I can get for you? You can get the hell out of my room. Wringing her hand, she went to pull the door closed. I'm going to punish your daughter, Talman said quietly. Marion stopped and gave a soft gasp. Marissa? Both, actually. Marissa has proven to be just as much trouble as Mickey. Punishing her, however, will have to wait for a few days, since I'll have to track her down. What do you mean, track her down? Judge Whitcomb had Marissa removed from Mackenzie's care. They've put my child, a senator's daughter, into foster care. Can you believe that? Marion's hand flew to her mouth. I didn't know. I guess it's because of what you said to the reporters the other night, Marion said with a sigh. Come here, Talman ordered. Marion moved forward, suddenly realizing the mistake she'd made by suggesting that he shouldn't have spoken with the media. Fear mounting, she moved forward until she was in front of his desk. He rose slowly and pointed a finger at her. Do you think to tell me what I should or shouldn't say to the media? No, of course not. The blow came quickly, knocking her against the bookshelf on her right, and she crumpled onto the floor. I'm sorry, Talman, I wasn't thinking. No, you weren't, but that's just par for the course, isn't it? Do women ever think clearly? Marion wisely didn't answer the question. He came around in front of the desk and knelt down beside her and offered his hand, which she took, and helped her up. There now. He motioned her into a wing-back chair. There now. He motioned her into a wing-back chair, and she sat cautiously on the edge. Talman began to pace the room. I'm surrounded by idiots. Things are not going well for me, Marion. I'm sorry, Talman. Let me do something to help. He stopped and looked her over. What little comfort her body could offer him, he'd take advantage of soon enough. He just needed to work out a plan of action. He shook his head. Kurt's in jail, denied bond. 2 of my men Kurt sent to do a job are also in jail. My daughter is in some stranger's home being kept from me. My campaign manager just quit. Polls have me about as likely to win an election as Charlie Manson. My career is over. I may even face a jail sentence on this ridiculous kidnapping thing. My aides and most of my staff have turned in their notices. The only ones still beside me are my attorneys, and that's only because I'm paying them big bucks. It's all over. Everything I worked for, everything I worked toward all these years, and you know who's responsible for all of it? Marion shook her head. That brat daughter of yours. Grimacing, she looked up at her husband, eyes pleading. Talman, surely you don't believe Mickey could do all this to you? The poor girl was kidnapped and held hostage for over a week. She's not in her right mind. Unless, she hesitated and looked up. Talman, please tell me, did you arrange to have her kidnapped? Did you order men to kill my daughter? He stopped pacing in front of her chair and grabbed her by the shoulders and pulled her up. He smiled and spoke surprisingly soft. Think, Marian. After all the time and effort I spent in molding that headstrong little girl into a successful young woman, would I have her murdered? Of course I didn't. She's lost her marbles. I can't even imagine what's going through her head. He hugged her against him, stroking her back, then pulled her away, his eyes gleaming. And Marian, don't ever question me again. His backhand knocked her to the floor again. He immediately felt contrite. Sweet Marian had stood by him through everything, always believing him, always backing him. He knelt down beside her and pulled her head into his lap and stroked her hair. There now. Everything's going to be all right. You know why, Marian? She shook her head. Because I'm going to make it right. I'm going to fix everything. And that daughter of yours is going to get just what she deserves. Then, in a few days, nothing else will matter. Would you like to go on a long vacation, Marian? Someplace warm? She sighed. That would be wonderful. Somewhere in the South Pacific? Maybe. Somewhere far away. We'll spare no expense. What about the girls? Don't worry about them. They'll be taken care of. This is just for you and me. Would you like that? He asked, gently stroking his hand through her hair where she lay on his lap. Yes, Talman, it would be so lovely to get away and lie on the beach and get a tan. It's always so cold and wet here. He rubbed his hand over her face, still surprisingly smooth for her age. He realized she looked a lot like Mickey, or Mickey looked a lot like her. But Marian didn't do it for him. Mackenzie, he sighed. He'd always wanted her. His young daughter, Marissa, he'd never had any interest in. That Keno kid was hot, but who was he kidding? It'd always been Mackenzie. New scene. How's she doing? Jeff asked as he came in the door and set Mickey's computer on the dining room table. I think she's okay, Jack said. She had a pretty good hangover this morning, but I fixed her up, and then I took her into her appointment with the shrink. And how'd that go? Hard to tell. Her face was all swollen from crying and stuff, but her mood seemed lifted. And then Marissa called, and they talked for a few hours, and there was another crying jag, but I'm thinking it helped her too. Tell me you accomplished great things today. Jeff grinned. I accomplished great things today. We're going to nail him. They're trying to reach some famous family of Kurt Wells and Butch, a.k.a. Alan Bradshaw. They think Kurt will turn state's evidence, and then that's all she wrote. Famous? Yeah. Wells's little brother is a governor, and Alan Bradshaw is the older brother of Matthew Wilson. Jeff nodded before Jack could ask. Yes, of the Dallas Cowboys. Amazing. Are they crooked? They don't appear to be. Daley used the governor and Wilson to keep Wells and Butch loyal. And how'd it go with the housekeeper? Dora rolled over today, but the feds want all their ducks in a row this time before they take Daley in and charge him. Cameron went out with Stevens and I early this morning, and we found the computer he saw Wells dump. We're still waiting to hear about what they found on the hard drive. Well, heck, you weren't exaggerating, Jeff. Did you solve world peace while you were at it? Not yet, but I'm getting ready to start on that one person at a time. Is she upstairs? No, actually, she's on the patio, sunbathing, and good grief, you should see her in that tiny black bikini. Jeff's brows rose. Jack shrugged. Sorry, man, but I'm human, you know. As long as you're also out of here, I'll forgive you for lusting after my woman. Man, I just ordered pizza. Jeff pulled out 2 20s. Be a friend. Go back to the hotel and order again. Jack grabbed the bills. I'm out of here. Hope you like pepperoni. Jeff grinned, closed, and locked the door behind Jack and turned to find Mickey. He watched her through the sliding glass doors as she lay in the late afternoon sun. He figured she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. She'd had her dark tresses up in a ponytail and wore sunglasses, and sweat beaded on her upper lip. Her skin glowed in the sun. The strings to her top were loose and fell forward, exposing a tiny triangle of lighter skin. His mouth went dry. When he slid open the door, Mickey raised her sunglasses to the top of her head and smiled up at him. Hi, Jeff. He knelt down beside her. Hi, yourself. You doing better today? She looked down self-consciously. I'm sorry about last night. I don't usually drink. He smiled. Yeah, I could tell that you're not real good at it. She gave a soft laugh. I love that sound. You laughing. I've not had a lot to laugh about lately. Hopefully that will change soon. She nodded and sighed. Let's talk about other things tonight, just things that are up and positive and have nothing to do with Talmud. That would be my pleasure, he said, forcing the images of what he'd learned today out of his head. It was hard, though. The guy had beaten her with fists and belts and clothes hangers and extension cords. He'd beaten her bare skin. He'd touched her. He'd humiliated her. And he would pay for what he'd done to his Mickey. His. That's exactly how he thought of her. His. His girl, his woman, his wife. He cupped her face and ran his thumb over her mouth. May I ask you a question? As long as it's not about the forbidden subject. I want to ask you to give our relationship another chance. I want to ask you to trust me enough to believe I won't hurt you. I know it's difficult under your circumstances to believe in me, but I'm not leaving you, Mick. I'm here, right here, and I'm not going anywhere. She smiled at him. I would have thought after I begged you to have sex with me last night that you would have figured out that I wanted us to resume our relationship. He breathed a sigh of relief. That's really good to hear. That doesn't mean I'm ready to have sex with you now. Well, when we're ready for that, we won't be having sex. We'll be making love, and I'm not ready for that either. The time is not right. I want only what's good and right for you. She sighed. I love it when you talk all forceful and manly. He smiled. Do you? She didn't love it last week, but he was smart enough not to bring that up right now. Instead, he lowered his head and kissed her softly. Mickey whimpered, arching her back and straining to press herself upward. Touching a finger to her nose, he smiled. I love you, Mickey. I have a feeling I will always love you. They will never go away, these feelings I have. I want to make you happy. I want to come home to you every night. Jeff? No, don't say anything. You don't have to reciprocate, not yet. Just accept it. Accept that you are loved by others, yes, but especially by me. He kissed her softly and pulled away. Jack ordered pizza. It should be here soon. And then I think I'll go take a quick shower, she said, tying the strings of her top so that she could stand without it falling off. I'll be waiting. New scene. They sat on the sofa, snuggling, when Mickey jumped up at the knock on the door. Steady now, he said with a chuckle. She started toward the door and he grabbed her hand. I'll get it. I'm not trying to order you around, but you are still under protective custody. She caught herself and stifled her automatic response. He grinned. Are you hungry? Starved. He came back with the pizza box and put it on the coffee table. Let's have a picnic on the floor in the living room. Sounds fun, she said as she jumped up to grab plates and napkins. Jeff headed into the kitchen as well and started to grab some wine, but then quickly changed his mind and grabbed a couple of sodas. Minutes later, they sat cross-legged on a comforter, the pizza box between them. It seems like it was months ago we ate pizza together that first night in a motel room in Red Bluff, Mickey said. It's weird to think it's only been a few weeks. A lot's happened since then, and a lot more is going to happen, but we're not supposed to talk about anything bad tonight, remember? She licked some sauce from her lips. That's right. So instead, let's talk about you. What do you want to know? How long have you worked for Ameritech? 10 years now. I was 20 when Jason hired me. Wow. That's a long time. I mean, most people have been through several jobs by the time they turn 30. Yeah, I've always known what I wanted to do. She smiled seductively. So, you're a man who knows what he wants. I am. And maybe that's why I knew the moment I saw you that I wanted you. She thought back to that moment and pushed it from her mind. No bad thoughts. You say you're going to visit your family next month? We always get together for the 4th. Why don't you and Marissa join me? Vicky's lips pursed as she thought. That's an idea. Can I think about it? Of course. It would be great fun, and my parents would love to meet you. Do they know about me and that you're the one who found me? Yes. When Daly plastered my face all over the television, they contacted Jason, and he filled them in. I spoke with them a couple of days ago, and they asked me if you're as pretty in person as you are on TV. She giggled. Yeah, right. What did you say? I told them you were absolutely gorgeous, but it was much more fulfilling to see you up close and personal. Oh, good grief, Jeff. You didn't say that, did you? Sure. It's true. She shook her head, sipped her soda, while Jeff finished off the last piece of pizza. She watched him. He was so strong, physically and mentally, so self-assured, so kind. How could she not love him? Leaning over, he took her soda from her and set it down, pushed the box out of the way, and sat with his back against the sofa. Crossing his ankles, he patted the spot next to him, and Mickey scooted over. Jeff draped his arm around her shoulders, and they sat in companionable silence for a long time before Jeff finally spoke. Jack tells me you had a counseling session today. How do you think it went? She looked down. Sharon Denton, that's her name. She's like 60, and she's very good. Sort of grandmotherly? No, not at all. At first glance, you might think she's a lawyer or some high corporate exec. She's sharp and professional. And you felt comfortable? Yeah, it was weird. It's like she had such an air of professionalism and confidence that I felt I could trust her. We really hit it off. I think she's going to be good for me. Eric recommended her? Yes. I guess he knew what he was doing. Remind me to call him and thank him. Jeff pulled out his phone, dialed the number, and handed it to her. No time like the present. Smiling, Mickey took the phone. Jeff watched her face as she profusely thanked Grandmaster Keno, answered some questions, and then spoke to both Shelley and Jeffy, and when she handed the phone back to Jeff, she had tears in her eyes. What's wrong? Jeff asked. It's just that they're so nice. They act as if they just heard from their long-lost daughter or something. They act as if they love me. They do. They don't even know me. They know your heart, Mickey. You are so easy to love. Eric said he was proud of me for being strong. All three of them ended their conversation by telling me that they missed me and that I could call on them for anything at any time. Have you ever heard of people like that? Jeff smiled kindly. I grew up with people like that. However, the Kenos, they're special. With them on your side, you'll never be alone. Mickey yawned and slid down to lay her head on Jeff's thigh. Jeff stroked her arm and back until she rolled over to look up at him. Do you still think you love me, Jeff? He rubbed his knuckles over her cheek. With all my heart. It still feels like I love you, too. His eyes closed briefly in thanks before he smiled down at her. That is so good to know. New scene. Eric Keno gave a soft moan as he lay in the dark kissing his wife. He wasn't sure how it was possible, but he was more in love with her now than when he'd fallen hard and fast 16 years ago. Life with her had been glorious and at times scary, frustrating and rewarding, yet never dull. Never. She taught him so much, though he was supposed to be her teacher. Tonight, the lesson being taught was that a 49-year-old woman could have complete power over him with just the touch of her fingers. Shelley ran her hand over his chest, feeling the familiar ridges of muscle and the heat and warmth that seemed to seep from him always. She sighed in pleasure just before the door burst open. Eric was out of bed immediately, and Shelley sat up, swung her legs over the edge of the bed. Jeffy, Shelley said. Jeffy sniffed loudly. Something's wrong. Please, help me, Daddy. Eric was at her side. What is it, baby girl? Jeffy shook her head. Shelley placed her palm against Jeffy's forehead. Are you sick? No, not sick, Jeffy said, her speech beginning to slur. Her body jerked, and both hands flew up to cover her ears. Oh, no. Daddy, make it stop, please. Daddy, make it stop, please. Eric caught her as she went down. He laid her on the bed while Shelley got a cool cloth. It's another vision, isn't it? Shelley asked as she came back in the room. She placed the cloth on Jeffy's head and ran her hand over her face. Jeffy opened her eyes and sighed in relief. Eric eyed his wife. He would never lie to her, and he hoped the news wouldn't upset her too much, yet it seemed Jeffy was in for some bad times. He'd had visions and dreams himself over the years. As a matter of fact, he'd had a recurring dream starring Shelley long before he met her. That is how he came to be involved with her. Now it seemed their daughter, too, could have dreams and visions, but hers were beginning to prove much more powerful, much more real, and much harder for Jeffy to separate from her waking reality. Well? Shelley demanded. Well, yes, it seems to be a vision. Shelley stroked her daughter's face. Jeffy? Sweetheart, can you tell us what you saw? Jeffy blinked up at her parents. I'm not sure. Everything was dark, except for flashes of light here and there, and I saw shadows of people running through the dark, and I heard loud bangs, maybe like gunshots, and that the last one was so loud it hurt my ears, and I felt pain shoot through me, and then I felt so sad. She shuddered. I don't ever want to feel that again, that sadness. It was horrible. Tears ran down her face. Daddy? Yes, baby. It seems like the visions are escalating, doesn't it? He sighed. It appears so. Do you know why? I have a theory. Will you tell me? Eric glanced at his wife, unsure if he should go into it. Daddy, you always say that talking about things, communicating, is a powerful tool. You say that communication is a tool not only for learning, but for healing, too. Eric smiled. Well, then I suppose, since you're so good at throwing my words back at me, that I should tell you my theory, huh? I want to learn. I want to understand what's happening. Eric nodded. I know you do, sweetie. So here it is. I believe things have escalated because you are becoming more conscious, more awakened to who you are. Who I am? You mean like when we talk about people being more than just biological beings? Yes, like that. I'm speaking of our connection to something much greater than ourselves. Our connection to God. Who we are here and now is just a small part of who we really are. Jeffy nodded. I can feel that, especially when I can see things or know things psychically. I mean, it makes me feel like there's so much more to this world than what we can experience with our five senses. Exactly. And you know that I believe you're being psychic, you're having an abnormally high IQ, your physical capabilities, and you're having visions and dreams is all because you have something extremely important to do. Maybe even something special you were sent to the world to accomplish. I feel this only intuitively, but I believe it to be true. Well, it's more than intuitively. God's been whispering this to me a long time, maybe even since the moment you were born. And now I think things are escalating because you're coming into your own. You're growing and changing, and part of that, maybe a lot of that, is because you recently toyed with the idea of crossing the line from being an innocent young girl to being an awakened young woman. Jeffy sat quietly a moment, mulling over her father's words. Finally, she looked up. You're saying it's because I thought about having sex? Shelley smiled as Eric grimaced. Yes, Eric said, because of that. Because of how it awakened you to another entire dimension to your human existence. Jeffy sat up and nodded with a smile. Oh, yeah, it certainly did that. Eric closed his eyes and Shelley chuckled and took his hand in comfort. Jeffy grinned. Sorry, Dad. I know it's hard for you to have your little girl grow up, but I have to say, I am surprised at you. I mean, you of all people talk about how we all must grow women, and I suppose I wasn't quite prepared for the time with you as my baby girl to come to an end. Merely human? Eric, my love, you have never been merely human, Shelley quipped. He smiled and touched her cheek. Well, thanks for the vote of confidence, sweetheart. Still, you need to take me down off that pedestal. Jeffy smiled. What? Eric asked. Nothing. I just love you guys, that's all. I hope one day I have what you have. Well, that would make me happy to know that my daughter is as happy as I am, Shelley said softly. So, what do you think about my explanation as to why your visions have escalated? Eric asked. It's cool. I can deal with that. Eric sighed. I just hope your mother and I can. I understand that it's hard for you, Daddy, to accept my growing up. Yes, well, thank you very much for your understanding, he said dryly. And I'm sorry if I scared you and Mom just now when I came bursting into your room. It just seemed so terrible and real. It seemed so real. So do you think my vision will come true? I hope not. Yet experience shows you are usually pretty accurate. Jeffy shuddered. I wish I could do something to keep it from happening. I wonder if there's anything I could do. I suggest some prayer and some fasting and some meditation and ask God what you can do to help. The answers will come to you if you can quiet your mind and let the information flow. God will talk to you. She smiled at her father, hugged him, and kissed his cheek. Thank you, Daddy. I will do just that. She turned and took her mother's hand. Mom, will you come to my room with me for a little while? Sure I will, sweetie. Shelley turned and kissed her husband's cheek. Gotta go. Girl talk. Sighing, he kissed her softly, his disappointment obvious. She leaned close and whispered in his ear, At least she called you Daddy again. He laughed. If you're good, I'll come back later and call you anything you'd like. He smiled. I'll look forward to it. Eric watched them go. He felt uneasy. He rose and headed downstairs to check that the house was secure, just in case. New scene. Jeff lay next to Mickey in her bed, watching her as she slept. She'd had another nightmare, and she'd been so frightened he couldn't bring himself to go back to his place on the sofa. He was contemplating their life together as husband and wife when he sat straight up in bed, listening intently. Someone was in the house. In seconds, he was out of bed, one gun tucked in the waist of his jeans and the other in his hand, and he touched his pockets, making sure his cell phone, wallet, and keys were still there in case they needed to make a quick getaway. Jeff? Mickey said sleepily. Shh, he whispered in her ear. Don't make a sound. And that is the end of chapter 13.